Hey everyone, and hope you're doing well today. We're going to kind of double up on tutorials because really what I want to first start with is talking about mental ray and rendering really pretty renders and using what's called daylight lighting, and then how to light a model to look really good and how to make a nice render that you can use in Photoshop. So that's what I'm going to do right now to show you that process. And afterwards, I'm going to show you a model that I created so that we can go through some general how-to tips on how a model is created from like almost start to finish. And once we go through that, I'm just going to talk a little bit about registering to different websites so that you can put your renders up. So one step at a time, let's start. So let's say you have a nice model that you want to render, and I'm going to pop open just an old model that I have. Feel free to pop open any model that you have that you like. And I'm going to grab, let's say, a base body here. Actually, I'll just grab this little Boodle character that I had in one of the videos previously that I unwrapped. And I'll just grab this guy like this. So I'll just delete these, delete these. In fact, I'm just going to open up an older version because I believe I already did this kind of work on this one. So let's go here. There we go. Let's say we have our default character like this sitting in a room. Now you don't even need to unwrap it at this point. This is just a model just for viewing. So I'm going to center this in the room. I'm just centering it on the grid. So when I push Z, I have a nice centered model right here. And I go around and take a look at it. Now, if you have your model and you don't have a base, don't worry about it. I'm just doing this for rent. I created this for a render sake, just so it looks like a little toy sitting on top of a shelf. So I'm going to pick a nice angle that I like here, and just take a look at it. Awesome, right? So step one, make sure that your model is pretty much aligned how you like it. Push Z with it so it's centered in the frame that you want to render. And we go through our render setup first so that we can make sure all the render settings are exactly the way we want them. So you can go to the rendering menu right up here, and you can either hold F10 to open up render setup or just click render setup here. Now, normally we're on the what's called the scanline renderer, which is the default rendering process for 3D Studio Max. It's normally set to single. Yeah, just keep time output on single. If you want to render an animation, you can always go active time segment to render out lots of different files, PNG files, to use in programs like After Effects and Photoshop and stuff like that. And don't forget go down to output size and change it to something like HDTV or make it custom. Normally, I find that putting it 1920 by 1080 on HDTV mode is normally just fine. So to do a nice, pretty render, normally we have scanline render, which does this. Whoops. I had a file save. Whoops. There you go. Unhide all. Whoops. Sorry about that. Yours will render. Mine is having a slight issue. One moment. Let me just go here, import. I'm going to reset my 3D Studio Max, import, merge. There you go. So normally this is what you get. This is this basic scanline renderer, and once we change our render setup from single, keep it on single, go to output size, change it to HDTV 1920 by 1080. You get definitely a much bigger and better render of what we're looking at. So I'm going to find a nice angle that I like, and I'm going to go in this viewport, so whatever viewport you're rendering from, and I'm going to click on perspective, and I'm going to go show save frames, or you can click Shift F. And what that will do is it will create this frame right around your viewport, which shows you the exact size and what's going to render out in your camera. So you can see that whatever's inside this box is going to render exactly like that here. So, all right, step one, we have our model, we have the way it looks, we have our viewport set up. You can also use a camera, which you can find in the create menu here, down here in cameras, and you can create a target camera or a physical camera, whatever camera you want, and render using that camera. And then in the top left corner where it says perspective, you can switch to your camera by clicking the camera and the camera 01, And then you can use the tools down here in the bottom right, these camera tools, and we can start changing these, changing the camera perspective to the way we want, like that. And maybe a slight angle. I like seeing the back spike, like that. So once you have the camera set up the way you want, the next thing to do is we're going to use a rendering software that comes with Macs called Mental Ray. So you notice how fast this render went, like that, boom, instant, right? Well, when you're using something like Mental Ray, it calculates a lot more, takes a lot more memory out of your computer, but the renders become nicer, sharper, clearer, and you're able to use a lot of high quality lights and different light settings. Now, I'm no expert in Mental Ray, but we're just going to do some basic stuff to make our model look pretty good using some very simple lighting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Render Setup menu, or push F10 on your keyboard again. And where it says Renderer, Scanline Renderer right here, you can just click on that and change it to what's called NVIDIA Mental Ray. NVIDIA Mental Ray right here. You notice a whole bunch of more menus come up here. We have things like global illumination, we things have processing, render elements, etc., etc. But you don't have to worry about these right now. If you're going to play around them further later on, you can definitely play around and add new stuff. But for me, I just need to put Mental Ray on and watch what happens when we render. Now, you might not see it on my screen, but we're seeing like a quick breakdown of our model. It's breaking down the pixels and then sharpening the pixels so that everything comes really sharp. And now with Mental Ray, the biggest difference that we can notice, and my screen's a little frozen right now while it's rendering, but in the bottom left-hand corner, we have a lot of the render settings are right here by default. So we have things like image precision quality. See, this is almost at the lowest quality standard. Low, 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 low. This is everything set to a default draft quality. And you can see it looked just as good as our render did before. So if we were to boost this even higher, it'd actually be a lot sharper. So now that we have NVIDIA Mental Ray set up, now we need to start adding lights in our scene. Now we can add in, if we go to our light menu here, all kinds of different lights. The usual lights that we normally have, Omni target lights and stuff like that. We can go to photometric and add target light, free lights, sun positioner. MR stands for Mental Ray, sky portals. And we can add something. If we go down to the create menu here, create menu, go all the way across, we actually have a daylight and sunlight. Now, the daylight system, which is daylight right here, allows you to actually play around and create things like a daylight system. And it'll actually warn you, you are creating a daylight system. It is recommended that you use Mr. Photographic Exposure Control, which changes the exposure settings. Just click yes, that's fine. Anything by default is fine. And left click and drag, and you're going to notice you're creating a north, south, east, west crosshair. And for mine's big. And if you just move the mouse after you let go of left click the first time, so we left click and drag, let go left click, and then now we move our mouse, we actually have the position of our sun. I'll make this other one a perspective here. We actually have the position of our sun. Okay? And we can change that by playing around with these parameters. Now, if you accidentally let go of it, like right click or left click, you can click on it again and go to the modify panel, and you can see it's daylight 001, and we can modify this. And now, if we turn our render settings on one of our viewports from standard to high quality, you're going to see that nice light setup here. And the thing about the daylight system is there's only two options I really want to change. The first thing I normally change is when I go to the daylight modify panel, I go down to sunlight, and I go to MR sun. So Mental Ray sun. We're using Mental Ray, so we should use all the extra parameters Mental Ray comes with. Mental Ray sun. And the second thing I like to do is instead of skylight, I use MR sky, or I call it Mr. Sky, but Mental Ray sky. It says you are creating a MR sky. It's recommended to also add a Mr. Physical Sky, or MR Physical Sky, a Mental Ray Physical Sky environment map. Yes. So what this will do is it changes the render background for you to a physical sky. I just held Shift Q right there, and you'll notice we get this like grayish blue background, and that's because it's using a Mental Ray sky renderer, which is reflecting on our colors of our model. And you can see already that just by adding that daylight, we get this nice shadow, we get a nice color vibrancy, and it takes a lot of time to render. I'll let this one render out so you can see. but it actually softens the render a little bit, makes everything look a lot better than just a simple daylight, a simple render when you push Shift Q. You get little renders like that that look okay, but something like this definitely looks a lot more professional. And as you render it out, you can see the look from one of the old render. If you go back in the video, you can see it. Look, this looks way, way, way better. And that was just adding a daylight system. And when you go to this daylight system and you go to the modify panel here, you can change. We changed it to MR Sun and MR Sky, which we can modify both these values down here in the list. So you can see MR Sun basic parameters. We can actually multiply it so it's a lot brighter. We can keep it at 1. We can change the shadow softness. We can change a whole bunch of stuff here. Like we can even change photons, how much these photons reflect off each other, so that they bounce from each other. You can see the little photon meter build up here. So how many photons are coming down, build up. And then one thing I like to change is where it says position of the sun, the MR Sun position right up here. You can change it to match a date, time, and location, or you can change it to match a weather data file, which is very advanced. If you need to be very specific about what type of weather it's supposed to be, you can load up actual files, or you can go to manual. And manual allows you to manipulate this sun into the position you want. So for me, maybe something like this, casting shadows from this angle. Normally I have one light that's pretty much near the camera. Which is something like this. And don't forget that you can use multiple lights now. Now we have this light, and I can change some of the parameters to match whatever I want. You can even change the ground color of the MR Sky, the sky in the background, to any color you want. You can change the, all-weather type of sky model, haze-driven, all this other kind of stuff. Perez all-weather. And now we do a render. You can see it's like really dark now. And they'll go through that phase. But if we go to go back down, MR Sun basic parameters. If I go here and change it to haze driven, you can see it's a lot more clear now. And you can see because I changed the rate of the photons and everything like that, this render actually looks a lot different. We get a lot more of the color bouncing off of each other to make it look more more detailed and a lot different than what it once was. So playing around with just some these basic parameters definitely makes the model look like it pops a lot more. And we didn't even change the material. I'm using a very basic standard material on this model. Nothing has been changed yet on this model at all. All I did was I put one light in the scene. Now I'm going to add a second light. And this is what they normally call the backlight. I'm going to go to standard and make an omni light behind the character. And what this will do is it'll create a slight light rim around the character. So if I go here and just place a light, let's say right there, that looks good. We get that nice little rim light going on there. So you can manipulate both lights, play around, and keep one viewport on high quality for a bit, and you can see we can create some nice, unique ways to look at our model. So if I just maybe move this up like that. And then I'm going to move this Omni light around. You can even back up the Omni light to blur it out a little bit more. You can also change the Omni light parameters by going to the Modify panel. Normally what I like to do with the Omni light is make it a little bit yellow. So I just add a little bit of yellow to it, like that. And for my main light, I normally like to I keep all the settings like that. I normally like to change the night color from black to just a really dark blue. And then I make a render of it, and I see what that looks like. And it's still on fast quality. I haven't changed the quality settings yet. I'm just doing a fast render so that you guys have something to look at here. And you can see from just having a generic rendered model, we have something that looks a lot nicer. Has that nice rim light highlighting the tail. And we can also blur that out a little bit, of course. But you can see around this ear area, which hopefully you'll see in a second, around the ear, there's that nice little rim going around that. And it just breaks it up and makes it look a lot more professional. And like I said, I haven't even played around with material. I know there's a generic material on this model right now, but we can add in a material that looks a lot better, right afterwards. And so that's what we're gonna do. So now you can see the model. That looks good, but I still think that we can do one step better. We can add like some fancy materials and see what we can do. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add a skin material to show you something called subsurface scattering. If you push M on your keyboard and open up the material editor, you're going to notice something is different about your material editor than normal. Because we have mental ray mode active, it's going to give you a whole bunch of Autodesk materials here, general materials, and all that kind of stuff. So extra materials have now popped in 3 Studio Max. In fact, if you keep going down, you'll see there's even a whole mental ray box here that has like fast skin plus displacement map, subsurface scattering, physical properties. Not only that, if you keep going down, even further down, there's a whole mental ray section of different materials. And then below that, there's even Autodesk material libraries that you can now load up. Things like paint, mirrors, liquids, glass, flooring. We can make this entire model look like it's straight out of glass. Concrete, smooth plastics, roofings, sidings, site work, like asphalt, cobblestone, that kind of stuff. Stucco. If you want to make one of your models look like a statue, this is the easiest way to do it. So currently, what I want to do, just to showcase it off to you a little bit, is I'm actually going to add a subsurface scattering fast skin. And here's another one, subsurface scattering plus displacement. Now displacement, when it comes to skin, it's going to make it look like the skin is in and out a little bit. We'll try the fast skin. We need to do a fast render. But you can see all the different settings we have for this skin. If you double click on this material, look at all these settings. Crazy amount of customization that you can do to match your skin as close as you can to an actual character. And it gets quite absurd sometimes, but doing this kind of detail work and doing a render makes it look so much prettier, so much faster because of all those settings. And one thing when you start rendering out a scene like this is, remember our first renders when we didn't have Mental Ray on, took about literally 1 second to render now. 1 second to render. And that's not a problem. 1 second renders are great, but 1 second renders are also bad because they just... I don't know, they don't pop as much as these renders do. You can see it just by adding the fast skin material and pushing this along. It looks good. It looks like a weird type of skin on this model, just a basic peach skin type shape. The light reflects a little bit better on this one. It just looks good overall. I like the way it looks like an actual doll that you can almost pick up. The shadows look good. I mean, we can even darken the shadows a little bit, making it cast a lot more shadows, a lot more light on itself. And those are all things we can just like slowly but surely work on to get the final feel. This was just a fast skin renderer. You can see it's a nice looking skin, soft, has lights, highlights. It's just finishing up the render right now, and you should see it in a couple seconds. There you go. That looks pretty good. It kind of looks like a little statue. Now the next step is to go in something a little bit more crazy, and you have something with subsurface scattering and 3D displacement, and we can play around with that. In fact, I'll show you a couple other things, like one other thing before we head off and do something else for the render purposes. I'm going to go to solid glass here, and I just clicked on solid glass, and you can see the material preview here, solid glass. I'm going to assign it to my model. And it's going to try and preview the solid glass. It's not going to do the best job in the world. But once we render it out, you can see we got this nice... Now this is going to take a few seconds to render. And you probably won't see it a bit. But hopefully if you guys are working on anything like, remember the bottles and cans that you're supposed to work on. If you're working on something like a bottle, this is a good material to use. Just the Autodesk basic glass. In fact, if you want to use more glass, Mental Ray has a lot of different types of glasses, like green bottles and that kind of stuff. So it's really awesome. this render here, I might show, just save it in the email and send it to you guys along with this video, because it is a really nice fast glass that looks really pretty, and you can show it off to your friends and make any kind of model look really cool. And this is where it becomes into like product use, right? Like I talk a lot about video games and movies because that's kind of where I have my experience. But if you're showing off a product and someone wants something made of glass, doing renders like this, just and maybe even photoshopping it on top of a table or something like that, is so perfect to showcase how your final model progress will look. And people just love that stuff like crazy. Um, so this is just going to take a minute or two more. So I'm just going to talk while this is rendering out, and you'll see the final results in the end. Um, so don't be afraid to try and play around with mental ray. I know it sucks to kind of wait for your renders to play out, and sometimes you have to sit at a computer or even away from a computer and be like 5, 10 minutes, 20 minutes to do a simple render. But there are some renders out there that take like literally, some people have said 20 hours on their computer to do a render. That can be pretty crazy, but the effect you get from a nice like a nice, more complicated render with lots of lights, different camera angles, different views of your 3D model, that kind of stuff is really going to sell yourself to people who want to see your models. And I'm going to include some examples of different renders that have attracted my eye, and you can also look up anything like 3D renders, 3D wireframes, and see for yourself what you kind of like to look at. I think this model is just about done. Should be finishing up. Hopefully. Give it a second. 1 second. There you go. So that definitely looks a lot more interesting than the original model I had. In fact, I'm going to save this image because I do like it. I'm going to call it glass. Now, when you save an image like glass or something like that, don't forget that we have things like our RGB settings, and alpha channel is important, because if we turn on alpha channel, turn it on, that means it's going to be transparent. We can use it in something like Photoshop to build up a nice background and do some cool stuff with. If we turn it off, it's just going to render the entire background as is in 3D Studio Max. So if I save it as glass, then open up a program like Photoshop, we can start manipulating that picture and do some cool things with the background. Now I just saved out that glass PNG. It's great. Don't be afraid to play around with water, stone, glass. Those are just the basic Autodesk tools. But like I said before, if you push M, and Mental Ray has to be active in your render settings. Don't forget that first. Render setup F10. Sorry about that. That's Photoshop loading. Don't forget to go to Renderer, NVIDIA, Mental Ray. Okay, that's important. If you want to save a video file, just click Active Time Segment. Sorry about that. And then go down to Render Output, and then click Files. And then it will ask you to save what type of file you want to save it as. Save it as an AVI file or a MOV file or whatever you need to. And then you can use that in After Effects as an actual movie file as well. If you want something with a transparent background, though, you'll have to save a PNG sequence, which you can save just by clicking Files. You can just click PNG sequence and you'll be fine. Don't forget how long this takes, right? That's one frame I was rendering, took about 5 minutes, just a few minutes. But think of it, if I have 100 frames in a few minutes, that's a few hours, easy. So just try and use standard materials at the start, and then once you know exactly what you want to get, then you can use more advanced materials. So I'm going to open up that glass model here that we saved, and you can see it's completely transparent, just like I made that, just like I told it to be, turned on the alpha channel. So in a program like Photoshop, I just play around with my layers, and I can create a nice background of anything I want to make this model look really cool. So let's say, some water here, and then I'm going to add like stylish bars or something like that. I'll just go like, whoop. And then so I'm just playing around, and I'm just trying to make my render look a lot more interesting than it was previously. We can add effects, blending options, add a pattern in Photoshop, color burn it. Just to make something look really cool and a lot more different than other renders. A lot of people make standard renders that don't look good using just basic materials. But if we add simple things like even just these vertical lines, and then we have our model here. Maybe I don't want this whole thing. I'm just gonna pop it in a corner like this. I'm gonna crop this image to be like that. And luckily if you render out an alpha channel, what we can do is we can duplicate a layer like that. And you can see I can make it look darker. And I can even duplicate it again. Make it look really dark, right? So it's much more clearer to look at this than is the initial glass. So a lot of people do Photoshop tricks with their renders to do some cool stuff to them. So for instance, let's say I'm going to make this background something more clear that we can see on top of. I'm just going to make it, I'll just make it straight gray right now. You can see we have this model and it looks pretty good like that, right? But I can take this guy right here, and just by going into blending options property and going to something like color overlay, I could change this entire glass color into whatever I want. Let's say I want it blue, right? So I'm going to give them a light tint of blue, very light tint of blue, like that. Oh, maybe I want to add a gradient to add some like further lighting details, right? Or maybe a little bit more shadow than he initially had. So then I add the gradient. Okay, maybe I'll add a inner glow to make the edges really pop out. And see, look how much more that pops out than it did previously, right? Just with slight Photoshop editing, I went from that to this, which definitely I think looks a lot more interesting. And I can still take this even further, and I can go like outer glow. And I can make it look like it's shining slightly, like the glass is kind of reflecting a lot. And then I just turn this map down, and now I get like a slight glow from this glass, just ever so slightly glow. So even though it's very subtle, it's there, and it can look a lot more interesting. I'm even going to add a drop shadow of, let's say, just a medium blue here. And you can see just with that drop shadow on and off, it just helps me highlight the base of the model, right? And then you can always take our original here, and I'm actually going to just do just a couple of Photoshop tricks. I'm just going to like scale this. Or what some people like to do is they like to do this. Hide it in the background, and then you just lower the opacity. You get something that looks, kind of like that. And then you can blur it out as well. So we go filter, blur, Gaussian blur. So now we're just kind of subtly hiding the model in the background. And you can even focus on the head if you want, like that. We're subtly focusing the head in the background while the model is sticking out up front. And yeah, if you don't want to, you don't want to. I mean, the whole point of this is that you can just do anything you want to and always add any edits in Photoshop. And it doesn't take away from your model at all. It just enhances your model. And that's what we want to do. We want to just make sure that you're having fun and doing a render that looks pretty, that people like to look at, and enhance it as much as possible. But for you, I mean, if you like it just with a white background, then by all means, boom, white background. There you go. Nice render. It pops out like crazy. And maybe what I'll do is I'll just add that. I don't need any Photoshop effects. All I want to do is look like it's sitting on a table, and there you go. I can even add this effect to make it look like it's on a table, like that. There you go. Now it looks like a flat table on the side of a table, and that's that. And maybe just instead of a full blank white, it's gonna make it slight gray, like this. Now it looks like it's sitting on a table. You can even add a small shadow if you want. What I'll do is I'll just add a black shadow about nay size. And I'm going to make that really dull. There you go. And like honestly, that's my render, right? Then I'll use a Photoshop text tool, glass, Boodle prototype. So if you had to send this out to somebody and they want to see what their product looked like, just label it like this. Don't forget to watermark your work as well. So if this is by yourself and this is like a David product, what I would actually do is type my name wherever above the product, or hide it even behind the product like this. And that would just make it really transparent. And that's always a good way to like watermark your stuff, is to hide your name slightly transparent so it doesn't bother the client, but they can't steal it because your name will always be a part of the image. And I know it's really hard for you to see, but hopefully you can see the word David in the background, and then I hide it in the background, and there you go. This is exactly how I'd probably hand a client a small prototype image. Probably higher resolution than this, probably actually twice as high as resolution, but this is pretty much exactly how I would do it. Or I'd hide the text here, like that, and then save out your image by going to Shift Save or Control Shift Save, and I call this Glass Boodle. And you can see how clear it looks. Like you see, like in Photoshop, it might have looked a little bit darker, but this actually looks more colorful because I'm saving it out as my monitor color. When I go to preview mode here, if you know Photoshop at all, and it looks so bright and poppy compared to just a plain old render. You know, if we go to a basic render here, and I go to Glass Boodle, open it up, look at that to that. Right? With a little bit of extra effort, a little bit more work, you make something pop out a lot more, right? And look a lot better. And even I can choose a different angle and re-render. You're never stuck with one angle because you have something in 3D, right? Don't be afraid to look something in 3D and go like, I need to change this, or this doesn't look right. Like maybe glass was the wrong option. Maybe I needed it to look more like water. Well, there's water. Maybe I need ceramic. There's ceramic. Maybe it needs to be a mirror. It needs to reflect everything in the environment. So, and don't be afraid to think to yourself, like, oh yeah, no, this needs to be super reflective. Sorry, I switched that to a sequence here. Let me render setup. Single. I'm going to see if this mirror material works. See, look at this mirror material. It's so weird and so different. And it's just trying to reflect itself. See, look at this. It's such an interesting way to look at it, though, because all of a sudden I'm looking at it and I'm like, that's so unique and different. And you can use this as layers on top of itself in Photoshop as something cool and unique, right? Don't be afraid to experiment. Even I experimented just like that second. I didn't even know what the mirror tool was. And now I know that that's exactly what it does. You see use colors, round corners, performance tuning. There's tons of different settings in 3D Studio Max to play with. And finding the right render settings for yourself is really an important part of what we're doing here. So just be sure to play around and try Mental Ray out, and just try and get a nice render of your work the way you like it. Like I said before, I will be sending some references of some other work that I like to look at, like the 3D renders from different companies and different references that I use and stuff like that. But don't be afraid to look up like something like even 3D renders on Google and seeing like how different companies show off their work. Like showing off the work like this. Look at this caterpillar right here, right? From, I believe this is Bug's Life. Full render up here with the nice lighting, and then it just breaks down into a wireframe render. And if you want to do a wireframe render, it's as easy as going to Material Editor, and whatever material you have, let's say I'll just make a standard material, for instance. Double click on standard material. In the top right, we can just click wire. And then I'll assign this to this model, let's say. And you can see that it's already showing just the wireframes of the model. Do a render, bring that into Photoshop, and we can just overlay this render on top of itself. This wireframe is going to look a little bit weird in Mental Ray. Oh no, looks fine. I'm just going to stop this render a little bit halfway so you guys can sort of see what we're doing here. But yeah, you can see the wireframe was being built out there. And you just have to save this, and you can overlay it in Photoshop. So if I want to show off this model, watch this. I'm going to save this wireframe as a PNG, and I'll save it as wire2 with the alpha channel. And you see we have our glass model here. I didn't change the size of it, so hopefully this will load just fine. And I'll load up this wire2. And since I canceled the render, it's only one little section, but that's okay. And then I'm going to bring it on top in the layers in Photoshop, and now I have a little bit of a wireframe here, right? And now with just some simple eraser tool, like that, just like that. And now we have a little bit of a wireframe so they can see that it was 3D and it went into the 2D shape, just like that. And we can do some cool effects with just some layer tools, and I can go like, Glass Boodle Prototype. Look at that color dodge. That color dodge makes it look so cool. And I'll do I think this is full view. Yeah, 100% right there. Like, yeah, that looks way cool. I actually really like that, so I save that. To save that out as, whatever number you want to save out as. And that's it. So just try and play around with getting like a nice render of something you really like. That's going to be really important for your portfolio, that you enjoy, that you do. And if it's a textured work, use the textures. And you don't need to use mental ray materials like this unless you're doing just like the showing off like the clay or the motion or stuff like that. But you be sure to use the mental ray lighting, because mental ray lighting makes all your work look really, really good. So just literally just play around. The other note, I was going to make an entire video on it, but honestly, I don't need to make an entire video, but I'll just recommend one website in particular, and that's a website called ArtStation. So a lot of artists have been using this website now because people are using it as like kind of a professional DeviantArt. So professionals tend to post their artwork and showcase their art, and you can always use the left and right arrows to browse through artwork. And posting these artworks, post your name, you post your jobs for you, and all this stuff, and people can comment, like, share, and pass around your artwork. So I highly, highly recommend that everyone create an ArtStation account. If you're going to post your artwork online, this is like the perfect place to do it and get feedback from not only professionals but new artists. Everyone joins this website and posts work and stuff like that. You can arrange, all media. You can sort out by trending, picks, latest, and you'll never know if you get trending on here. You can get job offers. There's tons of different jobs too if you click in the job sections. Gameloft is hiring in Montreal like crazy. There's companies all over the world who look for professional artists here. And you guys, I know it's pretty tough to think about like, your skill level versus these guys' skill levels, but you're not that far off. Look, he's got 2 comments. This guy's a professional, worked on Disney Infinity Toy Sculpt, right? So like, and he's got 2 comments. So don't be afraid if you don't get a lot of comments or a lot of likes and stuff like that you're doing a bad job. Just keep working, keep getting better at it, because I believe that any of you can do this type of model, given enough time and patience. The one thing you have to remember is that a 3D model doesn't take 5 minutes, doesn't take 5 hours. Sometimes it can take 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 months even. I just saw, I'm not sure if I can find it again here, my apologies, but the guy who worked on Baymax for the movie Big Hero 6, that sculpt took 10 months. 10 months to do of the initial, the armored version of Baymax. So take your time, be patient, do your work, make an ArtStation account, register, and I'll register as well so that you guys can probably try and find me. And then see where that takes you. And look for inspirations. Professional artists and stuff like that can really inspire you more than you think. And that's going to be really important when it comes to getting a job in the industry. So just take your time. And I believe that you all got this. So yeah, good luck. Do those renders. I'm going to be making a video again on this coming Monday. So, but what I'd like you to do for the rest of the week is I want you to you can model something new if you want, but take your old models, try and do some nice renders. Don't be afraid of different renders. Like, you see, I have this front view here. I'll also create a side view and maybe an angled view, just like 45 degrees. And that could be my render. I'll turn on save frames like this, and that's how I'll render, and I'll use my lights. Now, sometimes what's best with this light setup that I currently have, one light facing from my camera and one light facing the other way, is I'll just render out a model like this, and then I'll just grab this model and re-render it, grab all the parts to it, re-render it like that, render it like that. And then in Photoshop, I can put them all together afterwards, so it's a lot less work. If I do it here all like this, I need to adjust the lights to make sure every single model looks good. and that might be a bit tricky, right? Especially with our camera, and especially with this. If I put this on high quality, you're going to see that even though one model, I'm going to turn off the wireframe, sorry about that. Even though one light looks good on this character, here's the nice rim light and the nice normal light. This one, the light also in shadows block off his tail here, right? And that's why we need to change the lights for each render and try and do something cool. So you can always do front, left, and side views. Front, left, and angle views. You can always just find a really cool view of your 3D model specifically and do a nice render of it. And that always works as well. Just don't be afraid to try and experiment and do cool, unique things. And I'm sure that your models are going to look darn good, like super good. And using Mental Ray only makes your models look better. Even with standard materials, this is a standard material in Mental Ray that I'm currently rendering. Just using 2 basic lights, the daylight system and 1 Omni light. And it adds a little bit of a rim, it makes it look good. And you can see here, hopefully it'll be done in like 2 seconds, but that the model turns out very good and is definitely usable for a render and definitely usable to showcase. Nice quality. And this is on draft quality. This is like one of the worst settings in Mental Ray. We can boost this all the way to very high quality and then boost the soft shadow precision, glossy image precision, all this kind of stuff, and take it to the next crazy level. And don't be afraid to try weird materials to see what you can do and come up with. Currently, I have my own model, and I'll showcase that to you just really, really quick. That I'm experimenting with, like this. So I just started making this over a week time, but there's currently a skin modifier. Just a basic subsurface scattering fast skin, which you can find right here. Subsurface scattering fast skin. And I changed some of the settings just to work for actual skin. And if I'll tear apart this model a little bit and hide a whole bunch of stuff, so that it renders a little bit faster for you. Let me just hide that. Hide selection. Hopefully this will render pretty fast. Like I said before, sometimes models take a few minutes to render. Sometimes they take hopefully a single minute. This one will take a little bit of time. I changed it from low quality to a normal quality gloss. Normal quality gloss reflections, both on here. And my image precision is considered medium, and my soft shadows are high quality. And the final gathering precision is low. It's not draft, it's low quality. But you can see with the skin shader I have, and I use the same light system I just used on the little toy model, little Boodle. I had 1 daylight system and 1 Omni light in the background, and the same system is used right here. And once it's done rendering a little bit, I'll showcase that. It'll be about 30 more seconds. There is a front light that shows off the model really nicely, brightens it up. Then there's a backlight that makes this kind of like white, yellowish rim light around the model that pushes it off. So I'm going to exit here, and I'm going to, hopefully it'll pop down. Just give it 1 second. There we go. And you can see that we have the nice rim light that's created by an Omni light in the background and the nice front light that's created. And you can see it looks like a very soft plastic toy. And it has that really nice appeal. And that's just, these are standard materials. These gray things are standard materials. And the skin was just a soft skin shader of this one in M right here. And I just made the overall diffuse color a lot darker. And everything else just kind of came together really fast. I could also play around with the settings to make it look like more realistic skin, which I probably will do later on. But like that's the things I have to experiment with, and those are things you should experiment with too, because this is all about learning on a constant basis, right? And I believe that you can all make models just as good as I can, if not better than some of the people I saw on ArtStation, and start posting your work already, just maybe by making your renders look a little bit pretty and taking your time and making some cool stuff. So on this coming Monday, so you guys get the rest of the week to experiment, play around with rendering, ask questions if you need to, and I'll review some of your work by Friday night. I think Friday night the latest, I'll review some of your work. And then on this coming Monday, We'll talk about final video reviews for all the work you've done, suggestions and tips, and as you go forward. And we're just gonna push off from there, and you guys will start working on your own stuff. And that's the end of classes. So good luck the rest of this week. Do your best. Try and find models you really like. Do some pretty renders of them. Play around with Mental Ray. Don't forget to unwrap them. Maybe add a texture and light them up as you see fit. Don't forget you can add as many lights as you want. So if you like this Omni light here, hold shift, we can duplicate this Omni light, and I can really highlight, let's say, some part of it. You can see, like, as I move the Omni light, I'm like, oh yeah, maybe the light down here would look good, right? Maybe there's lights on the floor. Maybe these Omni lights aren't supposed to be in the sky. Or maybe this daylight here should be a lot darker, right? So we need to change the multiplier, the MR sky parameters. This changes the shadow density. Sorry, this one. So 1. There's shadows and multiplier up here. And you can see I can change it now. It looks really spooky. Okay, now there's a basic light. See, by changing it 0.5, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 10. Look how bright and crazy that is now. It makes it look very cartoony with that nice rim light in the background. But yeah, so I'll constantly play around and just see what you can do. Other than that, I think you guys got this. So remember, unwrap and texture. I want to see your unwrap and texture assignments. I want you to do some nice cool renders the rest of the week with whatever you got. And then on Monday, I'll try and get all those to me in like one big zip file. And then I'll do a big video review for each of you. And then we'll be off on that, and I can start giving letters or references and certificates out and everything like that. And you guys can enjoy your Christmas break coming up and hopefully model during then. So one video coming up tomorrow, just a little small thing. And then on Monday, I'll give you final video reviews and everything else. So take care and good luck.